And are we good? Is it coming through? Audio's?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's church history lesson. Much like the Broncos, our star quarterback is out with an injury. So they brought in the backup quarterback. No, it's good to be doing this first live stream and doing this lesson tonight. My dad, Ken, is obviously out with his hip replacement surgery, but he does get to be the peanut gallery in the audience tonight, so wearing a little bit of a different role. We'll just go ahead and jump right in. We'll start with the usual statements or questions. You can email or text Ken. His contact information is on here tonight. Again, a little bit of role reversal. Our word for tonight is providence. It is from the Latin root, providentia, meaning foresight, prudent anticipation, or timely care of preparation, which is what it took to get this lesson together. But we'll talk more about that later, and I'm excited to dig into this. Heard on the street, Kathy B., why did God allow Islam to happen? Excellent question, and as with many why did God questions, only he knows. Jesse B., said, I'm amazed that Islam is built on nothing but lies. And that was the thing that was apparent to me, was they can't even nail down the actual original documentation from Muhammad. It was years later that they began producing edited or approved texts by him. And then Steve Cox said, I do not want to get an F. It would hurt my GPA. So Steve, I hope you are ready. Got your notepad out for tonight, because there will be a quiz. I'm just kidding. So what's on the docket? What's going on? We're going to do a very brief reminder what is happening in this period in history. Then we'll go into who was Boethius, and if you don't know that name by the end of the lesson, you will, because that's who this is on. And what was his impact? And then at the end, or the second half, really is going to be the consolation of philosophy, his crowning achievement. So, signs of the times. Rome has fallen. It's 476 AD. The Roman Empire is split between the Eastern Empire, where you have Constantinople and the various emperors that are reigning, and the Western Empire, where the Goths, Ostrogoths and Visigoths and Punk Goths, I don't know, are all, they've taken over much of Italy, the Western Europe as we know it. They're the ones in charge. Later, as we move into the 6th century, I always have to remember it's a 6th in the 5th century, or 6th century in the 500s, the reunification of the Catholic Church after the Acacian Schism. And because of that, Theodoric the Great, who was the emperor in Italy, the Gothic emperor over Italy at the time, becomes paranoid about the political and religious redominance from the East. The Acacian Schism, as a reminder, continuation of the Christological debate. Who is Christ? What is his nature? Rome enters the discussion with their point of view. It becomes the East-West Schism. Pope Felix III tells Emperor Zeno he needs to defend the faith at the Council of Chalcedon. Acacius, Patriarch of Constantinople, prepares the Henoticon, which is the Act of Union, bringing the two church halves back together. And Emperor Zeno makes it law in 482. The East likes it, the West not so much. But again, we're still nearly 40 years away from the actual reunification in 419. And then a map of the empire. You can see the Western Empire, the Eastern Empire, the different areas that they had control over. And the West is a little bit smaller. You can definitely see the East has more ground to cover, but Rome is in the West. So that's why it is still the Roman Empire, and that's what makes it important. So, in light of all of that, enter Boethius. Who was he? He was born in 480, 4 years after the fall of Rome, as Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius. And if that's not a name that you can, what a name, Manlius, then I think we're falling short a little bit. He was orphaned following his family's decline. So he was from a wealthy aristocratic family who went into decline and was orphaned. He was adopted by Quintus Aurelius Memmius Symmachus, another great name, who would later become his father-in-law. And I don't know if that was part of the adoption process. If he was older, wasn't clear on that. But as he was in this adoptive family, he received a classical Roman education. He learned both Greek and Latin, which at this point in time was a little bit less common than would previously have been. By the age of 25, he's a Roman senator in Rome. By the age of 33, he's a consul. So that's a step up. Think you're a representative in the House and you've stepped up to senator. And then later, within a few years, he is personal advisor to Theodoric the Great. So he becomes the head of state almost, not the king, but he is right there in his personal cadre of people giving him advice. He was imprisoned in 423 at the age of 43, so you can see his quick rise and very quick fall because he dies in 524. So, what did Boethius do? And a better question might be, what didn't he do? Because as I really began studying him in particular, not just his works, he did a lot. He preserved much of Greek philosophical works, including Aristotle. There is even, it wouldn't be a very strong argument, but what we know of Aristotle might not exist without Boethius. He also, he was working on translating many of Aristotle's works from Greek into Latin, and the same for Plato. He established the quadrivium and trivium as the primary educational structures, drawing on classical Greek education. He made significant contributions to musical theory, and we'll dig a little bit more into that. And then he wrote the Consolation of Philosophy. And then, in addition to that, he did write multiple other theological treatises that would continue to shape the church and the theological debate for the next millennium.
Quadrivium and the trivium, are you going to talk a little bit?
So, in education.
Nice segue.
He wrote De Institutione Arithmetica and De Institutione Geometrica, that one. The quadrivium, we'll start there, and this is about math. So he believed that math was made up of 4 parts: geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. And if you did not have an education in all 4 of these, you could not be called a mathematician. The trivium, grammar, or the mechanics of language, learning terms and definitions. Logic, the mechanics of thought and analysis. Does it make sense? Is it false? Can it be proven false? And that's kind of an early precursor to the scientific method of iteration, trying to prove, it's difficult to prove something true, but it's a little easier to prove it false. And then rhetoric, the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. These 7 together made up education for, again, 1,000 years. His works is what was taught at every university, every school. Everyone knew Boethius's 7 liberal arts. In music, and this is the one that, as I started reading it, got excited about. De Institutione Musica. So, music was broken up into 3 parts for Boethius. The first was the Musica Mundana, or the music of the cosmos. It was the mathematical harmony of the universe, including the orderly motion of the stars and the planets. It was inaudible to human ears, but governed all of creation. I love thinking about that. Like, if Ben, I know you especially, if you are a lover of music, you think God loves music and he wants us to love music. And so for them to have this mindset puts in frame of mind a very specific creator who wanted to create something that would move the human spirit. And that's the next part, music humana, the music of the human being, the harmony that exists within each person, balanced between body and soul. It is proportional relationships that make a person whole. So everything in balance, everything in its right proportion makes a whole human being. And it is the psychological and moral harmony that produces virtue. When your mind and your morals are in harmony, they act out together to produce the virtue or the music of the soul. And then lastly, the musica instrumentalis, instrumental music or audible music produced by voices and instruments. It's the physical sound governed by mathematical ratios, intervals, scales, modes. It was considered the lowest form of music because it was material, but still followed the same laws that structured the cosmos and the human soul. And then from that point, it bubbles back up because that audible music has an emotional impact. We all have a song that in some way it affects us on a level that can't be explained. It is a spiritual thing. And I'm going to pick on my mom for a moment, and she doesn't know this, but there's a song that she cannot listen to without crying. And it is called The House on Pooh Corner. And I played it once, like she told me about it. I played it once for her and she got mad. She's like, turn it off. I can't listen to it. It is too emotional for me. It is and it portrays kind of this, it's Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin this idea of growing up out of childhood and becoming an adult. And for her, that is extremely emotional. And it moves us in a way, and it changes the way we think. And then the way we think and act impacts the wider world. It is, flows further up to that cosmological music. All right, so who's who? So notable influences that Boethius had, and these are just a few. Thomas Aquinas, in his Summa Theologica, refers to Boethius 135 times. Now, most people probably at least have heard of Thomas Aquinas, but maybe not Boethius, which is interesting because Thomas Aquinas thought a lot of Boethius. Dante Alighieri is our next gentleman, wrote Dante's Inferno. I know you've heard of that. And that was actually part of a trilogy. And so Inferno is his journey through hell, Purgatorio is his journey through purgatory, and Paradiso is heaven, paradise. And he places in his books, Boethius is in paradise. So his character encounters Boethius living in heaven. Geoffrey Chaucer, Canterbury Tales, A Knight's Tale, draws directly from Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, nearly word for word in some cases. He also translated the Consolation of Philosophy from Latin to Middle English. Later, it was also translated by Queen Elizabeth I. It influenced other authors and thinkers such as Thomas More, John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, William Shakespeare, who directly addresses and talks about some of the things in the Consolation of Philosophy. And then C.S. Lewis also wrote about him and is quoted as saying, until about 200 years ago, it would have been hard to find an educated man in any European country who did not love the Consolation of Philosophy. So if you're starting to get a picture of who he is, we're very much kind of getting into that territory of Boethius was kind of a big deal. He very much had a major impact on the world. So AI, it's becoming more of a thing, and I decided to ask the AI, why does Boethius matter so much? So the AI says, Boethius is often called the last Roman and the first scholastic. His work preserved ancient Greek thought, structured medieval education, shaped Christian theology, and influenced philosophy, logic, and music for a millennium. He is one of the few figures whose intellectual legacy bridges antiquity, the Middle Ages, and even to the Renaissance. And it blows my mind still that until a few years ago, I'd never heard of this person. He, as you start to find out about him, he is one of those few people in history who really impacts history. So, words of the week as we get into the kind of his works. From Latin Logan, consolation, from Latin meaning consolationem, meaning a consoling comfort. Now it is a noun of action, so which is kind of an odd one. Like verbs are the action part, but consolation is a consoling comfort, and it is expressly implied as something that is active upon you. And then from the Greek, guskenosis, philosophy. It is from the Greek philosophia, love of knowledge, pursuit of wisdom, systematic investigation. And it is derived from two different parts. Philo, meaning love, and Sophia, meaning knowledge or wisdom. So, and then that's from the sophist, wise and learned. So I do love the word philosophy because it is that love of wisdom, and it, to me, implies something to be pursued. And so when we put them together, we have the consolation of philosophy. So, the consolation of philosophy. First off, it was a work of genius. It is right up there with any incredible work. And so C.S. Lewis is stating that every educated person in Europe would have loved this book. I can believe it. He wrote the entirety while he was in prison. So in that 1 year when he was imprisoned, he wrote The Consolation of Philosophy. It was written, the style is made up of both poetry and prose. It was a technique called prosimetrum, and it is dialogue interspersed with poems. And it was that ancient Greco-Roman writing style. In the dialogue sections, the tone is instructive. It is meant to teach not just the character in the book. You're not just reading about the story. You are also experiencing it. It is meant to be instructive to the reader as well as the character within the book. And then in the poetic sections, Boethius uses multiple varying meters between each poem, clearly showing a mastery of the art of poetry. He understood what he was doing, and that is more than I can say about anything that I've ever written. Is either I'm going to be very, very literal and thorough, or I'm going to stray wildly into completely, I'm sure, diabolical prose, poetry. So, to set the scene, again, Boethius is writing this from prison. We kind of went over the signs of the times. He is a personal advisor to Theodoric the Great. And what happens is because Theodoric is becoming paranoid about the East influencing the West, taking over what he views as his kingdom now, he begins to look for treachery around every corner. And he accuses one of the senators, I believe, or perhaps one of the other consuls, of this sort of treachery because he went to Constantinople and then came back. And when he made that accusation, Boethius, who was a moral and good man, stood up for the guy, said, "No, I don't think that's what's happening here." And Theodoric says, "Well, you must be in league with him, and so we're throwing you into prison." And so here we have in Book 1, Boethius, the character being written by Boethius himself, in prison. So it very much is, it's in a way, it is a fictional autobiography. So what I'll do is I'll go through each of the chapters, discussing a little bit about the overview of what's happening in each chapter. And I've selected different poems or different verses from each of the chapters as well. I feel like for a book that it deserves to be read, and it's difficult to provide an overview of it in such a short time, that this hopefully will give you at least a little bit of a glimpse into that and will maybe spark some interest in it. And it is very much worth reading. So, Book 1, we find Boethius imprisoned. He has fallen from grace. He no longer has authority. He no longer has his wealth. He's been taken away from his family. And he writes this, the very first part of the book. "I once composed verses with joy. Forced by grief, melancholy measures I now collect. Torn muses bid me write, elegies drench my face. Terror no more prevents these songs, my final companions, from brightening my path. Poems, once the glory of my green youth, console me now in old age's gloom. Old age came unsought, hastened by evil, commanded by pain. With white hair whitened and skin trembling loose, my worn frame quakes. Death, sorrowful in sweet years, called in sadness is welcomed. He shuns my wretched cries. He refuses to close my weeping eyes. This dismal hour engulfing my head came while fortune favored me. She changed her cheating face. Now wicked days drag forward endlessly. My friends, you boasted my happiness. How faltering was that life of a man now fallen." He's only 43 years old at this point. He's not old. But that's how he views himself at this point in stage. He has fallen from grace, and he is just a wretched man laying in prison, surrounded by, as he says, the Greek muses. So it opens with that as the poem. That's the very first lines in the book. And he is having a pity party. And the muses, drawing from Greek mythology, he says the muses are there, it's the Greek, the muses of poetry, and they each have a name. I didn't include them here, but they are there consoling him. And consoling, not consolation in the way that they're comforting him, they're kind of egging him on in his grief. Like, yeah, you deserve to be as upset as you are, and none of this was you didn't deserve any of this. You're a good person, and on and on. And then Lady Philosophy appears. Now, Lady Philosophy is the persona of philosophy itself, the love of wisdom. And she enters the scene and sees his state, and he is a again, classically educated, learned man. And she begins by driving away the muses. And to quote her, this is a great opening scene. He's on the floor, muses around him, Lady Philosophy enters and says, "Who let these whorish stave girls come to see a sick man? It's more pain they bring than remedies. No, they make things worse with their sweet-tasting poison. These are the kind of women that choke off a mind's rich fruit, wrapping it up in sterile thorns of passion." So that describes the muses. They are there egging him on in his pity party, trying to just drag him further down. And Lady Philosophy knows that he is capable of much more than this and says, "Get away. You need to be restored to your former self." So she spends the rest of chapter 1, or book 1, diagnosing Boethius's ailment and draws some different conclusions about his condition. The first is that he has forgotten his own nature. She asks him, "Are you a man?" And he says, "Do you know what you are?" is what she says. And he says, "What, do you think I'm a man? I reason, I live, and I die. That's a man." And she goes, "No, man is much more than someone who lives, reasons, and dies." Second, he has forgotten the end to which all things are working. And this is setting things up for later in the book, God's divine plan and providence. He knows the end to which all things are working. And lastly, Boethius has forgotten how the world is steered, not by random chance, but by individual action. So that is book 1, setting up both the remaining arguments, how Lady Philosophy provides real consolation to Boethius and drags his mind out of the mires and muck of misery. So, book 2. In book 2, Lady Philosophy begins her administrations by discussing the true nature of Lady Fortune, who Boethius blames for his current position. And he views Fortune as another entity, an actual goddess Fortuna, and he views her as an angry goddess whose only joy is in the downfall and misfortune of those who have previously been blessed. So the poem for this one follows. "Treacherous as the tide, twisting lives with the flick of her hand, she tramples kings. She encourages the destroyed, laughing at the weeping and groaning her harshness causes. This is her amusement, proving her power. She revels in her show. The fortunate she prostrates in 1 hour." So that is his view of philosophy. It is the goddess Philosophy, and she exists for no other reason to build people up and then kick their legs out from underneath them. And the fortunate she prostrates in an hour. That is he's directly referencing his rapid decline from having much to having nothing and being imprisoned. But here, Boethius's influence in the consolation of philosophy even extends into pop culture. So the picture on the screen here, you have the goddess Fortuna standing next to this wheel to which these different people are kind of adorned on it. And what this is the Rota Fortuna, or the Wheel of Fortune. That's where the Wheel of Fortune comes from. It's from this particular chapter in this book. And in this, what he is referring to is you have a king who's on top of the wheel. And so as the goddess Fortuna spins the wheel, you have a king who's on top, and then he descends and is brought low. And for other people, as she spins the wheel, you begin to ascend, and then you're on high. And so as she spins that wheel, you're brought low, brought high. All depends on Lady Fortune. Lady Philosophy, without bringing the actual entity of Fortune into the book, but discussing it, she takes on the voice of Fortune. I'm going to speak on behalf, as if I were Fortune. And she says, "This is my art, this the game I never cease to play. I turn the wheel that spins. I delight to see the high come down and the low ascend. Mount up if you will, but only on condition that you will not think it a hardship to come down when the rules of my game require it." So, in this instance, fortune. What is to be fortunate is to receive good fortune, is what we would say, but you could also be fortunate and that you receive bad fortune. And that's what the argument that Lady Philosophy then continues to make is Lady Fortune is fickle. She is going to bring you high, she's going to bring you low. You can have riches one moment and lose them the next. And she makes the argument that anything you do have doesn't truly belong to you. And I think especially in our consumerist society, we kind of ride high on what we have, and then we also kick and scream when we lose things. It's not a misplaced example that she provides here. So Lady Philosophy shows that Lady Fortune is always fickle, and then leads Boethius to an understanding that ill fortune can be beneficial, as it shows for truth the things which fortune cannot take away. So there are things that we do get to experience as true joy. And for Boethius in particular, his father-in-law loves him. He had a beautiful wife before being imprisoned and got to spend many years with her. He even saw both of his sons rise to the position of consul as well. And that was a joyous moment for him. And that's not something that Lady Fortune gets to take away. And so, again, Lady Philosophy is exposing Lady Fortune for being the fickle person that she is, and basically is saying, don't rely on finding happiness in the things of this world, because what can be given and taken away. So that is book 2. Book 3, and I love this picture. This is just an AI drawing, but having determined that happiness and blessedness does not come from the things we own, Lady Fortune goes to the next stage of Boethius's remedy, and she begins to describe for him the true goodness that surpasses fortune's games, and ultimately ends up arguing that God, she makes the argument that God is the one true and complete happiness that all men should strive for. So, this verse in particular, I will try to make it through without, this for me stirs up some emotions, but so we'll start through it. O Governor of the universe, ruler with perpetual reason, Father of earth and of heaven, you propel time towards eternity. Unmoved, you cause all to be moved. Nothing external bid you make your work of flowing matter, but rather this form, the highest good innate. From heaven's pattern, you in generosity derive all, yourself the most beautiful, bearing in your mind a beautiful world, forming it in like image, ordering perfect parts to become a perfect world. All you have completed with, bound with numbers, you join the cold with flame, the arid with wet, lest the fire too light spin out, or the earth by weight overburdened should sink. You connect the soul, triple nature's middle part, dispersed through harmonious members. This soul which moves all things, divided into 2 orbits, gathers motion, making a return and passes into itself, encircling the vast mind. Turning the heavens in the same manner, you, from like causes, you bring forth souls and lesser lives. Equipped with fleet chariots, you plant them aloft into the heavens and on the earth, and by your kind law order them home. Back to you in a journey of fire. Father, flash forth in splendor and scatter the mists of the earth. Permit my spirit to rise and grant light to my mind, that I might fix clear sight on you, source of all good. To the blessed, you are quiet calm. To see you is both purpose and end. You are the leader and the way, the first and the last. And to me, that's such a what a complete description of God. It hits all the points for me. It's God as the orderer and creator of the universe, but more than that, he brings forth beautiful things. He brings forth the lives that we have. And Boethius, and in this poem, recognizes him as the leader and the way, the first and the last, and he is both the purpose for which we live and the end to which we live. And that's not far from what Jesus calls us to, if we're honest. Further in book 3, this is fairly early on in it, actually, where she begins to describe this, the complete goodness of God. Lady Philosophy begins to also explain that God is the one that's in control. He is the ultimate good, and the ultimate good is the thing that ordered and created the universe. And in him, there cannot be found fault. But that leads to some additional questions. So, book 4, Lady Philosophy has shown that God is the ultimate good, that he is the one that orders all things, and he is moving all things toward his own good. And she sets up Boethius to ask the question. And this is the question that everyone gets asked. Everyone knows the question. I'm going to see if anyone can guess what it is. If the ruler of the universe is in fact good, why is there evil in the world? And up to the end, huh? The unanswered question. You get an answer tonight. I don't want to downplay, the poetry is beautiful, but as you start digging into the prose, the dialogue between Lady Philosophy and Boethius, her arguments are incredibly sound. And Socratic dialogue is a little bit, it can be a little bit simple. In writing, it tends to be, I make these argumentative statements to prove my point, and then the other person, the other side of the dialogue says, yep, that sounds true to me. How can I argue against it? And Boethius says so in multiple points. But so he asks the question, if the ruler of the universe is in fact good, how can evil exist or go unpunished? And the discussion does get a little bit topsy-turvy in its arguments at this point. You have to read and reread and sit with it for a minute to understand what they are trying to say at this point. They are all extremely logical, and it's Lady Philosophy is very thorough in that she sets up one argument, and then on top of that one, you build another one, and it's as if she's building a house in a way where she's improving on each argument and laying this foundation to understanding why there is evil in a good universe. And she further goes, so the other question that often gets asked is, alongside this, is if God is good, then why are good men punished and why are evil men rewarded? It often seems that way. We live in a culture where it can feel that way. I'm living a good life. Why is my ideas being put down on? Why are we being, persecuted in these ways? And in America, we don't truly understand this, but we begin to see that in other places. So her conclusion ultimately is that, and it leads, Harold, in your question, in answer to your question, it actually leads into book 5. But for Boethius's particular question on good men being rewarded and bad men, or bad men being rewarded and good men being disciplined, Lady Philosophy states that while evil men, good men grow from the disciplines they receive. It is when, and you see this in Christians who, when we know that our home is not of this world, that our physical belongings don't truly matter, and we experience hardship, we rely more fully on our faith in God and grow from it spiritually. We become closer to God through trials and hardships. Not everyone succeeds in this, but ultimately, if our faith is in God, that's where we should go. Bad men, evil men, shape the chains around their hearts and don't truly receive any good things. And so I had AI have this richly dressed businessman holding his glass of wine, and he is manacled and sitting in chains of his own making. The other image that I thought about putting in here, and I couldn't bring myself to do it, is from A Christmas Carol, where you have particularly the Muppet one, where the Marley and Marley show up, and Ebenezer Scrooge says, "What are these chains you are wearing?" And in the book it's the singular, but for the Muppets it was 2. They say, "We forged these chains in life, and now they bind us." And I think that's a very accurate description of, where things end up at. So the verse from book 4 here: "See those lofty kings sitting atop their high thrones, distinguished in their shining purple finery, protected by sullen troops, threatening with grim faces, panting in their rabid hearts. If someone would but snatch their false cloaks, immediately would be seen men strangled with inner chains. Desire within disturbs hearts poisoned with greed. There, anger as destructive wave lashes the mind. Either sorrow exhausts or hope, fleeting, torments the captive. And so when you see this one head which all tyrants bear, he, pressured by these masters of malcontent, does not do what he himself wishes." There's I forget who the person is, but the statement is, "Hell is locked from the inside." And that's the idea that she's trying to create. It's that within hell, you could unlock and leave had you the option to, but you've put yourself in these chains and you enter this cycle of not being able to leave the life that you have created around yourself. And that's, to her, what evil looks like. It is the choice. She says God has ordered all things for the good, and it is the choice to leave that path that then is evil. So God has his plan. When you leave it, then evil occurs because it's not in accordance with his divine nature and divine ordering. It is. It's a lack of morals. And in chapter 4, she further says, really what they're after is God, but they go about it in the wrong way. They want goodness, and they see goodness as power or wealth or self-sustainability or fill in the blank. And there is a right way to obtain those things and a wrong way. And when you pursue it wrongly or pursue that solely and exclude everything else, then you end up at the same point where now this is evil. So she closes with a very lengthy description of God's providence and ordering of the universe throughout all time. Specifically, she points out that God's providence, and I don't have it up, but it is that preordained ordering in a timely manner, and that fate is the instrument through which individual moments are governed. So that leads to book 5. She closes book 4 with a very long description of God's providence and fate and that interaction between the two. And then you end up at book 5. So, and this one, again, there's this fantastic progression throughout the book, throughout the Consolation of Philosophy, where you have way back in book 1, Boethius drowning in his own misery, throwing his pity party, and philosophy is trying to bring him out of that. And so she starts with simple things. It's easy for us to say that material things are not what find true happiness. Everyone knows this. And further, book 3, it's easy to see that there is a goodness we all pursue, and that goodness must be God, and that He orders the universe. And book 4 talks about if there's a good God, why is there evil? And ends on His providence. And book 5 then, getting deeper into the subject, is having determined that God is the ruler of all, and speaking to Boethius of God's divine providence, which is His foreknowledge and orchestration of all events throughout time, Boethius raises the question of free will. If God knows all and orchestrates all for His own good, does free will exist? That's another heavy question. It's something to grapple with. And if free will does exist, then it kind of trickles back to the question of where does evil come from. But Lady Philosophy gives an emphatic yes to this answer. Free will does exist. She states, human souls are necessarily more free when they continue to contemplate the divine mind, but they are less free when they fall down to human bodies. Their ultimate slavery comes when they are given over to vices and fall away from the possession of their reason. For when they have cast their eyes from the light of supreme truth to lower, darker things, they are soon blinded in a cloud of ignorance and disturbed by destructive passions. Assenting and yielding to these passions, they increase their servitude that they've brought upon themselves, and in a certain way, they're made captive by their own freedom. And this calls to mind for me a certain Bible verse where Paul writes, He has darkened their understanding, that they might not know the light. I think so. Boethius is very clearly drawing on Paul's letters here and what Jesus teaches. And again, that through their own freedom, God grants the free will, and through that freedom, then they enslave themselves. And we were made slaves to sin, but we are freed through Christ. So, the poem here is this. The sun, clear with pure light, all things sees and hears, sang Homer with honeyed voice. But the sun prevails not in the earth's womb, the light of its rays too weak to burst even the sea's depths. Not so the builder of the universe. No mass of earth nor dead of night can stop his gaze from the heights. What is, what has been, what is to come, he discerns, he surveys all. He alone is the true Sun. So Homer, being the Greek writer of the Iliad and the Odyssey, is who she's referencing there, and talks about the sun can see all things, but when it's nighttime, or, Ben, you were showing pictures of the Red Sea earlier and how clear it was. You could see a good ways down into the water. How far out, though, before you couldn't see any further? The sun has its limits, but Lady Philosophy says, nope, God, the creator of all, has no limits. So you end up in something of a paradox. God knows all, foresees all, and if he knows all and foresees all, then does free will exist? Because if you have free will and I'm going to intentionally try to change my mind and make this moment into something different, then does God know that I'm already going to do that? Or is it backtracking and he knows, oh, you would have done this instead in this situation? So ultimately, Lady Philosophy brings up the argument that probably, again, you've heard of, but it's not often talked about or thought on deeply. And it is that God's nature, which transcends our mortal experience, is able to experience and comprehend all of time simultaneously and at a glance. To quote Philosophy directly, if you want to examine God's foreknowledge carefully, you'll consider that it's not so much foreknowledge of the future, but rather a never-failing knowledge of the present moment. So, and I think that's a great description. God's ability to have a never-failing knowledge of this exact moment, of every moment throughout time. Again, it's beyond our comprehension, which is why he's God and we're not. So, does free will exist? Yes. We make our own choices. But again, referring back to biblical thoughts, he knows the hairs on your head. He knows the hearts and thoughts of man. And if he knows you so well, better than you know yourself, then yes, he knows what you're going to do. I thought about doing this as a demonstration and decided against it. But I was going to have Logan enter through the back and pop a balloon at this point and watch everyone jump. And point out, though, that I orchestrated this. I knew it was going to happen, and I knew when it was going to happen, and I knew what your reactions would be at that moment. That's God, only much, much broader and bigger than my small example. And you would all have, I couldn't point to every single one of your emotions on that. God could, but I know that you would jump at, like, pow! And everyone would whip around and look at Logan standing there with a silly grin on his face. But foreknowledge, timing, knowing things, having never failing knowledge of every moment, that is the way God sees the world and us. And thinking back to, when they say God is always experiencing Jesus' death on the cross, I think that's something to consider. The final words in the book are this. Lady Philosophy says to Boethius at the end of all of this discussion about, and she's brought him out of his misery, he's contemplated the goodness of God and further free will and God's providence, and says, so let us shun vices and cultivate virtue, lifting our minds to proper hopes and offering humble prayers on high. For if you wish to speak the truth, a great necessity has been placed upon you men to do good, since you live in front of a judge who sees all things. I think that's a powerful thing. It's puts that responsibility to do good onto us because we have a judge who sees all things. So, that is the consolation of philosophy. And I think I'm right on time to end with the end of an era. The 6th century is a point around which history pivots. It is the end of classical antiquity. The Greco-Roman world is gone. The events of the century set up the transition to the Middle Ages, and the Holy Roman Empire is coming. And in the midst of this, I want you to again consider this man Boethius, who wrote of educational works, wrote about music, wrote this book that was required reading in every university, where they contemplated God's providence, free will, the nature of evil. And this person shapes the next 1,000 years subtly, kind of in the background, because before tonight, most of you probably didn't know who he was. So, questions or comments?
I love the music thing that you talked about, that the musica of instrumentality, or whatever word you said, that was the lowest form,
Yeah.
which is the actual playing of instruments and singing. And but you don't think much about the music of the harmony of the cosmos and the harmony of between one another. And looking at that, that's a really neat and deep thought to think about, how in the world of mathematics, how those things all work.
Oh, yeah.
To kind of see that. I really like that.
He,
The instrumental part is being kind of the culmination of it all.
yeah. The music of the cosmos, there's a song that talks about the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, and to his listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. That's what he's talking about here. And again, that song is actually directly referencing Boethius, where he set out that cosmological musical thought. And until the Renaissance, and after, really, when you get to the classical composer era, that is the way people thought of music. I think we could do with a little bit more of that now.
And the other thing is, I wonder if the Constellation of Philosophy would have ever been written if he wouldn't have been in jail.
Yeah.
When I thought about that, if he wasn't going through hardship,
Right?
wouldn't it stop to pause and to think about, why are these things happening to me, and why?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's a great donation to history to write that book. But he had to go through something in order for that to happen.
Jesse, hold your book.
Oh. Yeah. So this is the Constellation of Philosophy. This is the book that my dad found, or the translation in particular that he found. I have this copy, and I have another copy that's a different translation, written by, or translated by, someone who thought that it would be fun to write it all in "Wilt thou, now thou shalt, forth go," all that kind of stuff. This one is a little bit more of a modern rendition of it. But I think, especially in comparing the different, I've gone through both of them and compared the poetry pieces and the other parts. They're slightly different, but I think they do capture the essence of what it is. The other fantastic thing about this is there are subnotes on every single page about every single reference that Boethius makes. And in particular, I said this is a work of genius. He did not have access to a library in this prison. And he references multitude of ancient philosophers and mythology, and just the way he describes, in particular in the poems, like I mentioned Homer, but he mentions in one of the other, the poem about God, the three-part soul. That's Plato talking about the tripartite soul. Men, pay attention because it's coming up this week. um, but talks about the Greek gods and the way that they brought light and transitioned things, and it's all meant to perform better poetry and increase the beauty of the poetry, and he very much does that. So the subnotes are very much worth reading as you go along through the book as well.
Yeah, this isn't a book for the faint of heart. This is a deep book, and I gave a copy to Nate, I think, and Nate said he tried to wade into it. He said, "I'm not getting it." Unless you're really, you need guidance basically through it. It is something that's nearly has to be taught, which is to our shame that we have to do that. But I will tell you that when I got into this 5th book, man, I was so in over my head, it was unbelievable. And I had to go back and read and reread, and I'd read 2 pages, and I'd come back and read 3 pages. That were 2 of them were the ones I just finished. Because when he starts talking about free will, I mean, he was stretching me in ways that I just like, I'm not getting where he is on this stuff. And it's a book that if we were doing a Sunday school class or a men's study or something, or women's, I don't know if I'd recommend for your women's book club. Unless you guys are ready to jump into the deep end of the pool, all right? It's not anything like that. But if you have not read it or done anything like that, I would highly encourage you to take a step up, because it will make you a better person just for the fact of reading it, just because, or studying it, I should say. And there are some other things that go in association with that particular copy that Jesse has. And there's what do you call it, the end of the thing, there's several.
Yeah, there's a number of different, so really, in this one, and to try and show it on the camera, that's the book, the consolation itself, and then the remaining there is commentary on it, talking about some of the different things. There's, what was it, the ladder of knowledge, I think is what they describe it as.
And then the one after that is,
let's see, there's the ladder of knowledge and the ascent to wisdom. Lady Philosophy as the physician. Again, her purpose in this is to provide remedy to him, to heal him of his mental malady, as it were. And there's probably quite a few other commentaries and stuff on it that it's worth walking through and reading.
but I will tell you the question that Jesse asked, and in particular, the one that through a good part of my life that I've kind of been interested in, is that whole idea of if there's a good God, then why do these things happen? I think after going through this book, that's not even a question. That's not even an appropriate question to ask. That all that shows, if you still have that question, that shows the lack of depth that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And he addresses that in this book, and it just takes you to a whole different understanding of our role in life, and how we can basically be better people, you know. Anyway.
So I haven't read the book yet, but a lot of what you said reminded me of Job, of his fall and why this happened. And I've always thought it was so interesting at the end of Job, when God finally, speaks up, God never tells him why. It's always, well, if you want to answer my questions, then I'll have a discussion with you, but not until you're able to answer, how was the earth formed? Who's making the sunrise every morning? And just, so, is it like, do they cross or no?
So a little bit. It does dig into that a little bit. It's a little more focused on much of Job, because much of Job is his friends and his wife kind of saying, "Curse God and die." Right? That really, it's Job's muses, yes, that kind of thing. But whereas Job eventually is restored, this is more about the process of restoration through the mind. And Job, at the end says, who am I? Like, I'm just glad that God, who am I that God decided to answer me, is where he ends up at. And this is a much more drawn out healing of reaching the point, not just of that, but understanding more deeply our role, our relationship to God, and that interaction between free will and the human mind. So, all right. Well, we will wrap up there. And again, next week, we've got the Dark Ages. Is that?
No, no
We're
meeting
not
next
meeting
week.
next
No meeting next week, then one class, and then we're off for the Super Bowl. Then we're back on. And so we will, in 2 weeks, resume our history class. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and have a blessed week.